For me, comedy is most funny at the apex of tragedy. The greatest gift of comedy is that you can use it to open up wildly uncomfortable topics.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hi, dear family and friends. I recorded this episode at the end of February at my home before Dwana and I needed to social distance. And in many ways, it really feels like a lifetime ago. Regardless, get ready for another inspirational and eye-opening story. And thanks so much for listening and subscribing on any platform and writing those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Stay safe, stay home, stay healthy, stay informed, and stay optimistic. We're gonna get through this together. Dwana White is dangerously provocative, loves dinner parties, is a fan of the dialectic, and is a professional funny girl who believes in the mind-body connection. Dwana grew up in Austin and San Antonio, Texas. She began modeling as a child and continued to do so off and on, even through law school. She's a former attorney with a background in criminal prosecution and business litigation, who's now writing and producing in Los Angeles. She began her career in comedy as a performer on the Second City stage, doing improv and learning the art of storytelling and character development. She's now writing and directing shows at the famed Upright Citizens Brigade, and she's penning the occasional educational think piece. Mental wellness is important to Dwana, a certified yoga instructor and a feminine sensual movement specialist. She's worked with numerous women and written about the body-mind connection and the use of movement as a modality that can aid in the healing of emotional and physical traumas. In her upcoming podcast, Under the Covers with Dwana, she explores the intersection of comedy, intimacy, and just how awkward it is to be human. I'm so excited to welcome Dwana. Hi, Dwana.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, I'm so happy you're here. And thank you for coming to my home. We first met at a podcasting convention. It was called Work It. And at that point, I think I had about 5 episodes under my belt and maybe had just launched with like 3. And you were just exploring the idea of podcasting. And I'm really excited to talk to you about your podcasting endeavors, but we're going to get to that in a minute. As you know, this is a podcast called Dear Family. So I always like to begin with my guests telling us a little bit about their family.
Oh, gosh. My family. They're nuts.
Are we all?
They're nuts. I once pitched an idea of a sitcom roughly based on my family holiday gatherings. I was brand new to writing and I was just like, I don't know what the format is, but this is my idea. And the feedback I got was, this seems completely too far out there. Try writing realistic characters. I was like, do you want to come to Thanksgiving? These are all real people.
This was growing up in Texas.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Growing up in Texas, I'm from a very close-knit family where on my mother's side, so the matriarchal line, I grew up with both sets of grandparents, but my mom is one of 5, my grandma's one of 7. We always had Sunday dinner, and my mom is never without at least 1 or 2 of her siblings with her in any endeavor. So for me, I always say like a regular Sunday dinner when I was growing up as a kid was usually around 15 people. Like that's just regular. So holidays are 30, 40 people.
So big family gatherings always.
Always. I'm very used to a lot of people talking at the same time and calling that a conversation.
And siblings?
Yes, I have brothers. I have 2 brothers.
You have 2 brothers. Okay, nice. So tell us why being human is awkward.
Oh my God. It's so gross, so messy. So I think we're just all floundering. And there's so much that I think a lot of us carry shame about or just flat out ignorance. No one talked to you about mental health. And so you don't know how to navigate your own, let alone have that conversation with a partner or friends. There's so many things that are not crisp and clean that we want to be crisp and clean, like our emotions, like navigating a relationship. What is something that you can expect from your partner versus what it is that you need to develop within yourself? Sex itself is messy. And I have found that I would say 95 to 98% of women are having terrible sex, but we're all out here like, I'm in the best relationship. It's just amazing. I wholeheartedly believe that physical intimacy is a manifestation of emotional intimacy, listening, communication, holding space. And if we're all 90 to 95% of us are having terrible sex, that to me speaks to a bigger ill in terms of lack of intimacy and communication. And I don't want to say that's anyone's fault. I think none of us were taught how to communicate and how to learn to hear someone else's communication style in a relationship. And where do we go for that help? And how do we progress? How do we even learn about good sex? When is a great time to tell my potential long-term partner that I might have credit issues or money issues
Right.
or that I don't believe in saving? I know someone who found that out the hard way. It was like, but a minute, he doesn't believe in saving. He's like, live for today. And I was like, yeah, you guys might have wanted to talk about that before you got married. Just different assumptions, even something as simple as division of labor inside the household. In a lot of hetero relationships and even non hetero relationships, we're all affected by patriarchy because we live in that system. So there's a lot of built in assumptions about who should do what and what that means to you in terms of your picture of the life that you want or the family you want. I always say everybody wants to be happy, healthy, have thriving children if you're into children or if you already have children. We all want that. The question is, how do you want it to look?
I love that. You're seeing that it's not just yourself, that being in relationships can be very awkward. I totally agree with that. Dwana, you grew up in the church where you had to be comfortable in front of others. Was that because you were singing or?
Well, that was because I was forced.
Okay.
I was a shy child, but in my family, you participate in everything associated with the church. So I went to vacation Bible school. I was part of the youth bell choir, the youth singing choir, the youth usher board. The idea that I was on an usher board where I have to pass things and wait for people to like pass it back and, dig through their pocketbook or try to, that one person who literally is trying to make change. And you're like, are you kidding me? Like, you knew you were coming here today. And if you didn't want to put a 20 or a 50 in the offering plate, like, why didn't you like stop at 7-Eleven and get a coffee and like make some change? Why are you doing this now on my watch? Annoying.
Well, okay. So that brings me to the point of doing comedy. You have to be very brave. I'm sure you probably could do a whole comedy skit on just waiting for those people to dig through their pockets. But I know that you also went to law school and became an attorney. So tell us just the path. What came first? How did you become an attorney? And then when did Second City fit in? Just give us a little history.
I became an attorney because it's what my parents really wanted. I think like many people of color, because I've heard this from other friends who are like, my choices were be a doctor or, be a lawyer. I'm argumentative by nature in the sense that I'm not going to go for the okey doke. Like, I want to know why. And I've always been like that. I need you to unpack what you think is the truth, because I promise you it's probably just your perspective. And so I ended up going to law school at my parents' insistence. And I did it. I made it. I made some wonderful friends in law school. I really didn't enjoy the experience in and of itself. But I always knew that there was something else that I was yearning to do in the world. And I've never thought about this. One of my friends who was literally born to be a lawyer, she quite loves it, was my best friend in law school. And she introduced me to British comedy, Wallace and Gromit and Absolutely Fabulous, which to this day is my absolute favorite. And I remember telling her, I think I'm supposed to be an actor. And she said, yeah, that sounds about right. And I said, what are you talking about? we're in law school or we're graduating from law school. And she said, yeah, but that fits with who you are, the way you see the world. So I loved that when I came out about my creative aspirations that, my best friend was like, I totally see that for you. And then that's how, honestly, I started delving into acting through modeling. I was modeling at the time to pay for school, and models were occasionally, and still are occasionally, asked to be in commercials, especially if you do a lot of lifestyle print. I was able to do both. Through that, I ended up taking an acting class, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be the next Meryl Streep. Like, I resonate with this completely. This is a complete channel for my trauma. I fell into comedy because one time I had an acting coach who was like, you're really funny. And I was like, I'm not funny. This is my real opinion. I'm not being funny. And he was like, no, I think you're really funny. And I think that that's something that you should look into. And I said, I don't know about that. Writing and comedy for women is terrible. We're the sidekick. This was pre-Amy Schumer. So we weren't starring in our own movies. We were always like falling down. And Black women were non-existent really in comedies unless you were a more bodacious stand-up comedian. And I've never been the funny one in my family. So I certainly didn't see myself as a potential stand-up comedian. And I never really followed a lot of female comedians because honestly, it's 2020 and there really aren't a lot of Black female stand-up comedians that people can name off the top of their heads, right? There's Wanda Sykes, we've got Tiffany Haddish now, Leslie Jones from SNL. And after that, I start to struggle. I think for most people, they could probably maybe on a good day name Tiffany Haddish, but that's it. And so that wasn't something that was on my radar. And he was like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about having more tools in your toolbox so that if someone presents you with a dramatic script that has a comedic undertone, you will never feel intimidated. You'll be like, well, I already know how to do that. And I was like, okay, that resonates with me, having tools in my toolbox. And so I decided to just take one improv comedy class at Second City.
In Los Angeles.
Yes. In Los Angeles. And fell in love with that. And I was very fortunate that I actually had a female instructor, and Hollywood.She, who is a television writer and actor from Chicago. And she said, you have a real gift for this. And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, guys are really aggressive, and improv is about stepping out onto stage with no idea what's going to happen next. And when you play with boys, as in anything, they tend to push girls out of the way. She said, well, I do see that you have a gift for this. And so she really encouraged me, and I kept going, and eventually was actually asked to be a part of the touring company for Second City.
So awesome. Also so brave, honestly. And to do improv, you have to also be like intelligent enough to know everything that's happening current event wise. And it takes a lot of different skills. So that's really cool. And that's when you know you've found like your passion, when it resonates like that. We've had a few conversations before, and you said that the portrayals of the beauty of Black women in mainstream society has largely been excluded. And, by what's worthy and what's considered beautiful. As you mentioned, you started off as a child model, modeled all the way up until what? You said law school, right? Do you think people's perceptions of what is considered to be beautiful is starting to change? Or just what are your thoughts on this?
I think that systemically, it has not changed. Systemically, we still are operating under a system of white superiority, and we market that through our images. Media is powerful. That's one of the reasons why I love storytelling. It literally shifts how we see the world. It shifts how we see ourselves. It shifts what we believe is possible. It can give us hope. It can inspire us. Globally, there's been colonization and white superiority. So yes, traditionally as well as systemically, the idea of beauty is still intrinsically linked with whiteness, not body size or anything like that. Beauty is political, frankly.
You mentioned that, in the Black community, mental health is not always discussed, and a lot of it has to do with stigma. And you said that it's more of a foreign concept. So, for example, depression might be seen as being lazy because it's a luxury to stay in bed, right? And you also said that for Caribbean and West African people, that mental illness is not even a thing that's discussed. And yet I'm wondering, do you believe that mental health issues affect everyone across the board?
Yes, I don't think mental health issues discriminate. I think
Absolutely.
anyone can be affected by mental health issues. And I think specifically if you are of Black African descent, whether you hail anywhere in the diaspora, right? Like slavery spread far and wide, and so did colonialism. So we are an amalgamation of African Americans who are descended from slavery, Black Africans who grew up in the Caribbean, who ran sugar farms and sugar plantations and pineapple factories and all of those things as well. And we're Brazilian and we're Honduran. And so we're everywhere. And I think wherever you are in the world, if you're Black, I think there is an extra layer, as you mentioned, of just stress that is ever present, hypervigilance that has to exist in your day to day existence, because that's part of surviving in the world where you are the lowest on the totem pole, where there are a lot of images, ideas that are pervasive throughout all cultures that rate worthiness in relationship to how close you are to whiteness. And it brings with it a whole host of other issues. I always say that while there are certain cultures that do talk about having a caste system, I think there's a caste system throughout the world. And the closer you can be, regardless of your ethnic identity, to having European features or European white skin, the closer you are to privilege.
And I had read an article about how Black boys in high school, if they are depressed and they act out, they're looked at totally differently than, say, white boys. They're seen as difficult, and there's that inherent racism. I guess my question, going back to the question, is how do you think it can be talked more openly about in the Black community? Do you think it's changing?
Back to your original question, whether or not how mental health services are viewed in the Black community. And of course, I'm not a spokesperson for all Black people,
Absolutely
but I would say
not. And I hope you know that
No,
I'm
of
not
course.
generalizing. We had spoken about this before,
Right.
and I think it's an important topic to bring up.
It is. And I'm seeing a lot more people writing about it. I actually know a lot of Black men who are organizing men only venues where men can come and feel safe
important.
and unpack
cry.
their feelings and cry.
Yeah.
I read several articles saying that Kobe Bryant's passing has given men an outlet to be emotional,
And hug each other. Absolutely.
And it's multi-layered for, I will say, I will speak to what I know, Black Americans and Black West Africans, but specifically for Black Americans, it's multi-layered because we're dealing with the generational trauma held over from slavery, and there wasn't room to have any emotionality. You had to be strong to survive, to persevere through atrocities that are unimaginable. And they're so unimaginable that a lot of people just don't realize the holdover from slavery. And it's not just slavery, right? It's not just slavery, because slavery became Jim Crow laws. And then if you don't know what that is, I suggest you watch Ava DuVernay's 13. That became Jim Crow laws. And then that became dying in the civil rights movement. But then you were still dealing with systemic things like redlining, like fighting in World War II or the Vietnam War, but not being eligible for certain home loans, not being eligible to take advantage of different things that were supposed to benefit veterans, not allowed to live in certain neighborhoods. So a lot of those things contribute to what we now have terminology for, which would be like living with a low-grade depression, that level of trauma that you're constantly dealing with on a daily basis. And I think now in 2020, we've seen an acknowledgement over the last 5 to 10 years of the fact that it's important for anyone, but especially for Black people, and I would even say LGBTQIA people and people with disabilities, to have a therapist that looks like you, that can relate to
Totally agree
the
with
experience that you're having in life. Because let's be honest, the medical community in and of itself is very white skewed. It is white male skewed. The likelihood that what someone learned during their clinical rounds and from a textbook, that's going to apply to you while they're living their life as on the scale of white privilege, they don't have a lot to offer you, because it's going to be hard for them to empathize. While they can maybe sympathize and see the outer effects of what you're dealing with, I really think it's important to have a therapist that looks like you and is understanding of your personal struggles. And I think we're now more willing to acknowledge that. And there are, thanks to social media, there are more outlets for those therapists to be seen, to talk directly to the audience that they want to speak to and work with and be of service to. And I think that's helping a lot of people. And, things are changing in terms of how we are openly discussing gender roles and toxic masculinity. And part of toxic masculinity is teaching boys and men to man up, that you can't cry. And to your point that you made earlier about how Black children are treated, just this week, there was videotape that came out of a 6-year-old Black girl being arrested
I saw this
at school because she had a temper tantrum.
Come on, really?
So
Unbelievable.
Black children are treated like adults and criminals when they do express their emotionality. So in a way that a white child would have undoubtedly been soothed, she got taken away in handcuffs. And if you're in high school,
it's absurd. It's absurd. It really is. Oh my God.
But it speaks to our systemic view of what it means to be Black and to be a Black child in America and not have any place where you're safe to process your own emotions. You can't even have a temper tantrum without getting arrested.
Right.
And then you go home and your parents undoubtedly are trying to help you brace. And so a lot of times helping someone brace translates into toughen up, because no one in this white-centered world has sympathy for you. No one sees you as a child that needs help. No one is going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Which is just going to add to stress. All right, we are going to switch gears, Dwana, and talk about you being a professional writer. And I know that some of this came out from your frustration of being an actress and having to say dialogue that just was written by men, and it just did not feel right. Why do you think writing about, whether it's your past and your family or just writing about anything, why is it so good for our mental health? And how did it help you?
I think it's so great to tell your story because it gives it context, right? Like it gets to live outside of you. And that can be a very healing process, regardless of whether you write scripts or you just write essays or articles or op-ed pieces or journal. I think a lot of times, writing it triggers, if you actually write with a pen, I always say some of my best ideas come from pen to paper. It triggers sort of your autonomic nervous system in a way that just sitting at a keyboard doesn't. So I have loved storytelling because it validates your experience, whatever that was. Even if you're fictionalizing parts of it for a script, it validates your experience and your perspective of a reality that you lived or that you know about. I think we need more of that. It normalizes certain things. It normalizes the fact that we're all humans, that there's only one race, there's the human race, and we're all struggling and falling up the stairs and being weirdos and desperately hoping to be liked and loved and, fumbling our way forward. And too often the stories are only told by white males. Like statistically speaking, even though you occasionally will have drinks or dinner with some white dude who's like, oh my God, it's so hard right now for white men. It's like everybody's out to get me and none of the jobs are for us anymore. And I'm like, really? Because statistically, like in terms of professional writers, only 4% of them are people of color.
Wow, that is very low.
That's really low.
That is very low.
I think there's no shortage of Black, Latinx, Asian people creating content, but you still run up against all white studios, executives who don't know why something's funny, who don't understand how you're quote unquote going to be marketable internationally because they don't like you or get you. And you still run up against them wanting to give less money and less opportunity to Black actors who want to lead things. So what led me to becoming a writer was I realized, as with many things, I have to be at least 3 times as good. And by that, I mean, I love the art of storytelling as a performer, but I also realize the stories themselves will never improve until we start telling our own stories. The idea that in the 21st century, the majority of roles for Black actresses are still the sidekick, the sassy best friend, or some sort of all knowing mammy type, right? Like who doesn't have a love interest, who isn't the girl that gets chosen unless she's my favorite thing in casting, ambiguously ethnic, which is their way of saying we would prefer if you looked more white, but if you have curly hair, it's fine. And then we'll pretend like we've checked the diversity box. And so for me, I just realized if we don't start telling our stories, and there's so many stories to tell, we have such vast experiences from all over the globe as Black people, then it will always be told through one voice, a predominantly white voice that sees us as less than and that sees us as servants or sidekicks instead of.
Yeah, narrative, like hearing other people's stories is so powerful and really is, I think, one of the best ways to get others to open up their eyes and find compassion, which is partly why I'm doing this podcast. And now you're writing and directing shows for the Upright Citizens Brigade, which sounds amazing. Tell us about that.
It's one of those things where you don't realize you can do it until you do it. I had an idea for a show and I knew I could write it and cast it and whatever, but then I thought, oh, I'm probably going to have to hire a director. And then I realized like, oh, wait, I am the one with the vision. I can put this together. So it's such a great opportunity to tell a story through my own voice, to be able to give voice to the stories of others who are marginalized that you don't often see highlighted, even on that stage. For all the great stuff that Upright Citizens Brigade does, I think even they would have to agree that it's still a predominantly white male space. And it's still a lot of bro comedy. And I will tell that to anyone's face. It's a lot of frat boy, bro-ish comedy. And we've seen that before. And it's not that funny. I don't know if it's because white dudes don't have anything to push up against. And so they just like make up stuff, but it's just not that funny. And we have a plethora of that out there. And it never seems to change. Like I've never seen a white boy comedy and been like, oh, that's nuanced. So I'm interested in not only writing and creating, but also producing the stories of other people, of Native American people, of seeing women who are of size, who are featured and not the butt of the joke, who are the heroines, who are the love interests, putting Black people and Asian people in the spotlight, putting Latinx people in the spotlight, giving a voice to trans women. So, I always want to see, for me, comedy is most funny at the apex of tragedy. That to me is funny. That point where you're just like, oh my God, I can't take anymore. And it becomes funny. So that's how I approach comedy anyway. And so for me, I think marginalized groups of people tend to have a lot of pain in their personal experiences as well as in their community experiences as well. And I think it's untapped, right? It's a gold mine that no one is looking into because they don't think those people have valid stories or that nobody wants to hear that. And I think the greatest gift of comedy is that you can use it to open up wildly uncomfortable topics.
I totally agree. In fact, like I remember a few years ago having a conversation with someone who said women comedians just aren't as funny as men. And I'm sorry, watch Saturday Night Live and the women are so much funnier than the men. Also, I mean, I can relate to that idea of the tragedy, like that kind of border of tragedy being funny. And I think that that's why like there's so many good Jewish comedians, or that, like vaudeville were mostly Jewish. It was all the history and fear of, having to flee and all of that. And behind their comedy is this sadness. And that's what makes it so powerful. But I love that you're tapping into things we haven't seen. So do you currently have a show, or is there one coming up, or?
And I don't want to say too much about it because I think it's a really great original idea, but I'm doing a show based on fairy tales as well as some new fairy tales that I'm writing. And then, of course, I'm developing my podcast as well, Under the Covers with Dwana. Honestly, we just need to look at stuff. We really, really do. It galls me to no end that people think the world is going to change, but don't want to, A, be held personally accountable, right, for our own personal shortcomings. And B, are like, yeah, that's going to change because I tweeted about it, but I'm not actually going to look at it. I'm not going to look at my part in the systemic problem, whatever that may be, you know?
Right.
All I can do is what I can do with the people that I interact with on a daily basis and how I show up in the world. And if everyone focused on that, everyone who cares, let's be honest, some people really are happy with the status quo. And it's not about those people. You know, my uncle is always going to believe that, you know, mental health is about people indulging themselves and also that your veneers were taken from dead people. Don't ask. I already had the conversation.
I kind of want to know, but okay.
It still never made sense to me. I was like, that is a terrible business model.
Okay.
That you'd have to go around the funeral homes and take out the good teeth from people that had great teeth and then make them into veneers. I was like, how does that even make sense?
Right.
It doesn't. So we're not trying to save those people. We are really not. They're on their own. But the people that you can have intelligent conversations with, that you know are coming from a good place, but perhaps are not aware.
You can educate.
You can educate.
Yeah.
And we all have ways to educate. You know, I have able-bodied privilege. I have pretty person privilege. I have tall people privilege. And honestly, there are privileges because there are things I never have to contemplate.
I like that. Pretty person privilege.
It's very real.
I like that.
It's very real, right? We give more deference to people that we consider to be attractive. We also assign them successful attributes, whether they've earned them or not.
It's very true.
As a Black woman, it changes how people, even all white spaces, relate to me. And I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
I have a different experience than women who are Black, who are not considered traditionally or, you know, whatever we want to call symmetrically attractive. I have people relate to me differently because of how they perceive me and how I look. And
now,
I'm aware of that.
Dwana, you are giving me a lot to think about. I know that while you were recovering from post-op, from an abdominal surgery, it was a very emotional recovery period for you. And you said nobody really talks about this. It's something that people don't discuss. And you dealt with some shame and medical misogyny, which you explained to me it's medicine that's geared towards white men and clinical studies and, you know, that have all been done for men. But you also dealt with a lot of feelings of isolation. And correct me if I'm wrong. Everything sound right so far?
There is a mind-body connection. And your body, I always say, she's been with you since day one. So everything you've ever experienced, whether it was emotional trauma or physical trauma, whether you've chosen to forget it or not, it's stored somewhere in your body. And the process of having to have my first surgery, which actually ended up being a major surgery because I had an abdominal tumor, was quite the journey. I really did have to advocate for myself because there is a difference in the type of care that women receive versus men in this country specifically. And clinical studies historically have only ever studied men. And I mean this up until in recent years, like it was late 90s when they started conducting clinical trials on women's bodies and women's health. So a lot of medications, a lot of diagnoses, a lot of medical equipment for the purposes of diagnosis are actually calibrated for male bodies. Little known fact. So the fact that women have heart attacks in a different way than men do means that the symptoms that women experience leading up to a heart attack are often misdiagnosed or overlooked. Women of any color are more likely to experience having a doctor tell them that they are imagining things. So that's basically someone gaslighting you. You go in there and say, I'm having these symptoms. And they say, you're a woman, you're hysterical. In terms of mortality rates, Black women tend to die in surgery from minor procedures. And so I basically did my research in terms of the type of diagnostics I wanted. And then once I was diagnosed, the type of surgery I wanted to have happen, what was out there, what resources were out there, what the latest clinical studies were saying, and who was capable of doing that, who was a woman. And I was specifically looking for a Black surgeon or a woman of color. And then I made a list and I interviewed them for a job because, take notes, healthcare in America costs money, which means it's sales, which means you're purchasing a service, which means you can buy whatever you can afford to pay for. They are not giving you a gift. You are buying something. And I don't care how great your insurance is, you're still going to get a bill. So that means you can ask for the services that you want. And if they can't provide them, then go to a different body dealership. I just gave medical misogyny and racism lectures to every healthcare. And you would be surprised how often healthcare providers make side comments that are quite damaging. A nurse saying, I just don't get why people are so hung up on stepping on the scale. And I was like, are you new to healthcare? She was like, no. And I was like, I was specifically I was in a clinic for a specialist who only sees women. And I said, I really was like,
is this your first day?
Yeah. I was like, is this your first day? I was like, we live in America, right? Where fat shaming is a big thing. Like it's the last bastion of like publicly acceptable grotesqueness that we're all seem to be comfortable with, which is like, okay, I'm not racist, but that fat person makes me uncomfortable. So we're still doing that. We're still fat shaming people. We're still linking body size with health, which there's no correlation, which BMI was actually it's for your insurance company. It's actually not real. It doesn't take into account your actual body composition, which is if you really care about your health, get a body composition test. But for me, what I learned after having a major surgery is body trauma. And I kind of knew this because I do work in body movement, but body trauma also triggers grief. As you're recovering, it's not just the physical pain that you have to deal with. And as surgeons, the only thing they care about is that you don't have post-op complications that would trigger their malpractice insurance. So as long as you don't die on the table or die, 5 to 10 days after from excessive bleeding, they're like, job well done. But you're left to deal with whatever emotionality comes up for you. As I said, the body keeps score. There's actually a book called The Body Keeps Score. Yeah. So it keeps track of all of your traumas. So I felt innately the stress and the grief of whatever my body had been through to try to keep me alive while I had this huge tumor in my abdomen. I felt the grief and the shame and the guilt of not doing a better job of taking care of my body, that she had to go through this in order to get my attention, to get me to slow down. And it just brings it, you're also unbelievably vulnerable. Like I had never, ever been under anesthesia. But that's a real level of vulnerability. That's where a lot of my anxiety came from. I could control who I chose, the level of research, but I was going to be completely vulnerable to people that I had just met once they put me out. 40% of Black women today in America are dying. That's not by chance. That's if 5 people walk in, 2 of you are going to die if you have a C-section.
Come on. Really?
Yes, really. Yes, really. And I mean at Cedars-Sinai. Yes.
I heard about that recently. But wait, really? It's that high? That just seems outrageous.
It is that high, and it's across all socioeconomic strata. So the woman that you've heard about, her husband has spoken to the Senate about maternal mortality rates because, let's be real, they have means. But also who almost died? Serena Williams. Who also almost died? Beyonce. Both of them almost died in childbirth. And I don't have 1/10 of Beyonce or Serena money in terms of the history of Black people in medicine, right? The Tuskegee experiment. Everybody knows the Henrietta Lacks story. And if you don't, it's on HBO, produced by Oprah, starring Oprah.
Based on a memoir.
Based on a real woman.
Yeah.
Whose family found out after she died that her DNA had been taken without her permission or consent for them to do cancer research and develop all these pharmaceutical drugs for which they have seen 0 dimes, for which she has received 0 credit. That happens all the time. If you guys don't know the Tuskegee experiment, where white doctors specifically chose to give placebos to Black farmers in Tuskegee, Alabama, to see what would happen if you had syphilis and it went untreated. In the 1960s, there's a whole slate of cases of non-consensual sterilization of Black women, forcing them to have C-sections and then giving them hysterectomies. So that is the history of medicine as it relates to Black people and Black women in America. So yes, am I hypervigilant as a human being? I am. But that also extends to, I know what to expect from the medical system in America and the idea of being completely vulnerable to people who are operating with unchecked racial bias. That's just scary. You are literally gambling with your life.
So it sounds like before you even went in for the surgery, there was some of that kind of anxiety because you knew you had to let go of your control. It was while you were recovering that you thought of this idea for your podcast, which I want to discuss. Tell us about Between the Sheets with Dwana.
Well, I did. I spent a lot of time in bed recovering, and I thought there's so many intimate things that we don't talk about that are so hard. And maybe you have one person in your life, or maybe you have no one in your life that you're really disclosing your anxiety, your fears, your concerns, the things that you think are silly, the things that you think everybody must know, but I don't know. All of those things, everything from boundaries to having a parent that's completely incapable of helping you. There were so many things that came up during my recovery that were tragic comedy. Everything from my mom showing up to, I'm doing air quotes, to help me and literally getting sick on day one. And yeah.
But you call this because you're having these conversations in bed.
In bed. And also because it's, it's a metaphor for, pillow talk, right? Where intimacy, bed is supposedly where intimacy is supposed to happen. And I think for most of us, it's not.
Let down your guard. And
it's supposed to be this place where you let down your guard and where you're most vulnerable because you're sleeping.
Right.
And, for those of us who are in relationships, you're sleeping next to someone that, that you trust the most in this world. Maybe. And this is supposed to be the place where you can be unfettered, right? In every way. In every way, with yourself, with your partner, not just sexually, but just like emotionally unfettered. And I think it's a great place to just unpack all the things that are intimate. I think, racism is intimate because it is about individuals understanding systemic privilege. I think money things are intimate. I think the things that we don't know about physical intimacy are intimate. I think gender identity. I think, admitting to someone when you're in a relationship that you have the kind of mother that's going to claim that she's going to help and then doesn't and finds a way to turn herself into a victim is something that's very intimate.
And as you said, awkward.
And so awkward.
So I love it. So it's going to be like a one-on-one kind of interview thing in bed.
Yes.
I love it. Oh my God. I love it. That's so cool. And then also you talked about how it's going to be related to like intimacy and sensuality maybe. And I know that you are a feminine sensual movement specialist, which sounds very exotic. I don't exactly know what that means. Can you tell us?
Sure. Movement is one of the easiest ways to drop into your femininity. And when I talk about feminine sexuality, I don't mean sexuality in terms of who you want to have sex with. I mean sexuality in terms of how you want to express your femininity. How do you want to wear it in the world? What makes you feel good and empowered and in your feminine? And that does not have to fit the paradigm of social mores about what is feminine, because for everyone that isn't necessarily dresses and lipstick. That might not be it. Or maybe it is, or maybe it's leather or whatever. But I really empower women to find connection with their bodies and empowerment through it. And also that connection of mind, body, emotionality, and body. And so that yearning, I think that a lot of women struggle with, to be fully in their feminine, to be fully free in their bodies, is something that I really work closely with women on, so that you can feel like you're living fully in your power. A lot of us live neck up for a lot of different reasons. There's a vulnerability living in a feminine presenting body. A lot of times we receive so many mixed messages about our bodies And it's always being something that's being marketed to us about what is sexy, what is feminine, what is ladylike, be sexy, but don't be too sexy. Never have sex, but be a sex kitten. Like those things don't.
So many mixed messages.
Right?
Well, so when you say that, you are a specialist, I know that you are a yoga teacher. Are you teaching this in yoga classes, or is this like you're teaching your actors on stage, or
No, we actually teach sensual feminine movement.
Oh, where do you do that?
I do it out of a private studio.
Okay. Is it like one-on-one kind of thing?
No,
or
it's
like a group class?
Group classes.
Oh, very cool.
All women. Soon to add retreats as well. But yeah, we really just focus on not only body love, and I mean that in terms of like an appreciation for the curve of your shoulder, right? The stretch of your fingers, the ability of your body to move and support you, and the ways that she's shown up for you and gone through everything that you've gone through. And then also we just really focus on dispelling the myth that there are good and bad emotions, there are good and bad ways to express your femininity. We're just kind of trying to blow up the binary, because I think we all contain a multitudes. And some days you might want to be dressed like a bright and colorful unicorn that skips down the street. And other days your feminine power may be, a power suit and a tie and Italian boots and a leather cuff or whatever. And women deserve to be empowered in all of that and given permission and the tools to embody the fullness of who we are.
Sounds good. We are coming to the last two questions. And this is a question I ask all my guests. If you could write your younger 20-year-old self a Dear Dwana love letter, knowing what you know now. So when you were 20, you were in college in Colorado? Or where were you when you were 20? I
was about to graduate from college.
Okay. And so what would you tell yourself? You're writing yourself a love letter.
Dear Dwana, you are so unique and full of talent and joy and curiosity. And you have an innate ability to be able to connect with other people. I think I would encourage my college age self to explore that deeply, to never shy away from new experiences, and to believe in myself. Even though you're going to get pushback, even though your family probably won't understand, that's not the goal of life, for other people to understand you. You should follow your passion, keep traveling, keep connecting with people, finding ways to shine your light in the world in spite of whatever pressures or disapproval you're receiving from people who want the best for you, but don't know what is best for you.
So it sounds to me like the advice you're giving your younger self is to just be brave and follow your heart, which is what you did when you went on that stage to do improv.
Yeah, I think more young people need permission to find the thing that you love, that brings you joy, and go for it wholeheartedly. I think so few people are encouraged in that way to really just, there's room for everyone, and just shine at what you love. It doesn't need to be practical or make sense to anyone other than you.
I totally agree. Yeah. That leads me perfectly to the last question, which is, do you have any happiness habits? What grounds you and brings you happiness?
Oh, happiness habits. That's interesting that you asked that. I've been thinking about joy versus pleasure lately. And I would say happiness habits, because I think of joy or happiness as things that don't necessarily have to have a point.
And pleasure does?
For me, I would say I always think of pleasure in terms of getting in touch with what it is that you truly desire, learning to have the power to ask for what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, pleasure is a little bit more nuanced and mired in all kinds of desire, right? Like being able to say that you don't want to go somewhere, right? Like being able to give voice to what it is that you truly desire and how you desire it and how you want it to have happen. Whereas I think of joy as something that has zero structure, zero end game, like children laughing, right? Like babies giggling. And for me, dance, I guess I would say that being able to move in my body is a happiness habit. And I oftentimes forget that for me, the greatest meditation is a moving meditation. it grounds me in a way that is joyful and happy, but is also spiritual.
Well, I really want to thank you so much. This has been so enlightening, and I cannot wait for your podcast. And I'm going to come see you do your fairy tale Upright Citizens Brigade. I can't wait for that too.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm excited. Thank you for having me. And I'm also very excited. Thank you for your enthusiasm about my upcoming podcast.
Oh my God. And I'm here for you to answer any questions.
I appreciate that. I think I'm going to have a lot of questions.
Okay, anytime. Well, thanks for speaking with us today.
You're so welcome.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.